Okay, next we're going to talk about bicultural, and what does that mean? It's the ability to understand and function effectively in two cultural environments. It's an individual, so yes, full stop there. But this was my favorite term to learn, and what it means for me to be Ethiopian and American, and to know how to kind of navigate through that. But it's important to note in the next sentence, as that says, an individual who's bicultural is not necessarily culturally competent. Just because we know how to kind of navigate through those two cultural environments doesn't mean that we have this sense of like, I really know all the different cultures and the variations, and even my beliefs and views and biases, or my parents' views, beliefs, biases, and things like that. Like, it doesn't mean that we're culturally competent, and it just means that we know how to navigate through those two cultures. So we're going to talk a lot about this too. There's videos that I want to make about what it means to, like for us to be Ethiopian Americans, and to have parents that are primarily just Ethiopians in values and beliefs and in assumptions. And so that's what we mean, and that's the working definition. This next two slides, I'll talk about ethnicity and race and how we define that. Ethnicity is designating basic groups or divisions of human beings as distinguished by customs, a common language, a common history, a common religion, or such characteristics. That's what we mean. Race is any of the different variants of human beings as distinguished by physical characteristics. One among the group of population constituting. This is a hard word for me. Among the group of population constituting humanity, where differences are biological in nature. So when we talk about race, we mean any of the different variants of human beings as distinguished by physical characteristics. And an aspect of that, a lot of the differences are biological in nature and transmitted genetically. So that's one thing to note. Okay, cultural adjustment curve. Let's talk about this. This is actually used for students studying abroad and their experiences with a new culture that they interact with. But I think it can help us in the way that we talk about people from another culture and how they interact with the new culture that they're going into. So this was developed at University of Cincinnati, and it's a curve that essentially shows someone's path of their level of comfort and satisfaction across time and place. So it's important to note the X and Y axis, because it's not necessarily saying how much of like that culture do they adopt, and but what is their level of comfort and satisfaction across that time and place. Okay, so you start with everything being new and exciting and different, and then there is a frustration and annoyance with everyday differences. Then you have a surface level of adjustment. Then you move to a place of confronting deeper cultural and personal issues, and there's more of an awareness. And then you get into a place of adaptation and assimilation. In a more general context, I think it's important to note that the amount of time that a person spends in a specific country is not necessarily enough. And I don't think that this is a linear thing where like the more time that they spend, the more that they will adapt and assimilate, simply because I think we know about how immigrant families behave when they get to like the US. Let's kind of break that down. If you look at, let's say, Hispanic families and Asian families specifically, and there's research that kind of highlight this, they tend to, there are Hispanic and Asian families that can come to the US and be surrounded by people and community groups that are either Asian or Hispanic. And actually, I kind of want to, let's backtrack. I want to do this in a different way. In a more general context, I think the amount of time spent in a specific country is not necessarily enough. I don't think this graph shows like it's an accurate view or something that we can apply to immigrant families, as in, the amount of time that they spend does not necessarily correlate with how much they adapt and assimilate to the American culture. I think this can be said even with Ethiopian families, because if you think about it, when they come to the US, they're plugged into Ethiopian groups. They might go to Ethiopian church, have Ethiopian friends, live with other Ethiopians, or even work in an environment that's predominantly like with other Ethiopians. I don't know that that holds as strongly as it does in Asian or Hispanic families. One of the things that you'll know is even in Asian families and Hispanic families, when they come to the US, it's set up in a way that they can live here for 40, 50 years and not know any English or have to kind of interact with the American culture simply because they're able to have a life that is sustained and even is doing well without necessarily having to integrate themselves to the American culture. And so you can have businesses, make money, make sure that your family is doing well and thriving, and not necessarily have to interact with American culture. I think a little bit of that can be said about Ethiopian families, but that's one thing to note. And so if we're talking about level of comfort and satisfaction, it's important for us to know, if we're working with a family, how much of the American culture have they adapted and assimilated to? How much of, and even in the process of acculturation, how much of the values, the beliefs, and the behaviors of that American culture has been integrated into that immigrant family's life. That's something to be aware of. Okay. So let's look back at even the ecological system.